These vanishings were never accidents. The ocean remembers what history was forced to forget. Chapter number 1. The Silent Service. They called it the Silent Service, not because it lacked a voice, but because its voice was never meant to be heard. Below the surface of the oceans, where the light dissolves into shadow and the weight of water crushes sound into silence, machines were built to vanish. Submarine steel leviathans designed to prowl unseen, their very existence predicated on absence. From the very beginning, they were more than ships. They were ghosts summoned to haunt the sea. In the First World War, the German U-boat prowled the Atlantic like a predator, striking merchant convoys without warning, leaving the shattered wreckage of wooden hulls drifting on crimson foam. The ocean became both battlefield and burial ground. To those who saw them, these machines were monsters. To those who vanished without warning beneath their torpedoes, they were death incarnate. But if submarines were born as assassins, they grew into something darker still. By the Second World War, their role had transformed into an art of stealth. The Pacific theater became a graveyard of shadows. American submarines crippled the Japanese war machine, severing its lifelines in silence. German U-boats, once feared, found themselves hunted, their crews trapped in a war of invisibility. Thousands of men descended beneath the waves, sealed inside steel coffins that demanded absolute obedience to the abyss. Some resurfaced in triumph. Others never returned. War carved them into myths. But myths do not protect the living. For every submarine that returned, another slipped silently beneath the waves, consumed not by enemy fire, but by the ocean itself. Pressure valves failed. Engines stalled. Fires ignited in sealed compartments. Hulls buckled, twisting steel like paper. The sea does not forgive mistakes. It erases them. As the Second World War ended, submarines should have faded into relics of destruction. But the Cold War required them more than ever. The oceans became veils, and beneath them lurked arsenals of annihilation. Nuclear submarines patrolled the depths, carrying missiles capable of ending civilization with a single order. The abyss was no longer just a battlefield. It became a doomsday vault. The Silent Service had evolved into the most dangerous secret humanity had ever placed beneath the sea. Crews lived for months at a time in labyrinths of steel, where silence was both survival and torture. Every sound was measured, every vibration feared, for in silence lay the razor-thin line between predator and prey. Above them, nations played at peace. Below them, submarines prowled, watching, waiting, unseen. But not all of them came back. The sea demanded its share. It always has. Submarines, for all their engineering, are fragile things. They descend into an environment not meant for human life, where pressure can collapse steel with the ease of a hand crushing an eggshell. They are machines born to disappear, and sometimes disappearance was permanent. Some sank in storms, their wrecks scattered and unmarked. Others imploded in an instant, their crews extinguished in silence. To the governments that built them, these were statistics, losses to be buried in classified files. But to the families, they were ghosts, husbands, fathers, sons who sailed into the abyss and were swallowed whole. The oceans are vast enough to hide such tragedies forever. The Silent Service became more than a phrase. It became a sentence. Silence for the families left behind. Silence for the crews entombed below. Silence for the missions that never returned. Even when technology advanced, even when sonar probed deeper, even when satellites traced the surfaces of the seas, silence remained the final word. Some wrecks were found decades later, twisted hulls lying like tombstones in the silt. Others remained missing, their coordinates erased from memory, their stories sealed beneath miles of crushing black water. The submariner's world is not measured in distance or time. It is measured in silence, in secrecy, in shadows that close tighter with every descent. Men trained to adapt, to live inside claustrophobic corridors, to breathe air recycled by machines, to trust that the hull around them will not betray them. But always, just beyond the bulkheads, is the abyss, cold, eternal, waiting. There is a reason submarines inspire both awe and terror. They are triumphs of engineering, yet every voyage is a gamble against the ocean itself. Pressure rises inexorably, and every dive is a wager that steel and rivets will hold against forces older than humanity. For those who serve within them, survival is never a certainty. Silence is always near. During the Cold War, this silence took on new meanings. Submarines carried secrets nations could not admit. They intercepted communications, shadowed enemy fleets, and lingered undetected beneath foreign shores. When some failed to return, the truth was seldom told. A malfunction, an accident, an incident at sea phrases that concealed the horror of implosion and suffocation. Files were sealed, records altered, explanations withheld. The ocean was blamed, and silence became law. And yet, silence is not empty. Silence is a presence, heavy and inescapable. It fills the hall. It fills the lives of those waiting at home. It fills the history books, not with answers, but with absence. The Silent Service was not only a military branch, it was a ritual of disappearance. As decades passed, the ocean floor grew crowded with relics. Some were rediscovered, broken steel shells lying shattered in the darkness, their names carved into naval memory. Others remain undiscovered, their coordinates lost, their stories swallowed whole. The abyss does not volunteer its secrets. It guards them jealously. The Silent Service was never truly silent. Its silence was composed of screams no one could hear, implosions no one survived, and truths no one would speak aloud. It was the silence of men disappearing in the night, of machines engineered to vanish, of governments willing to bury evidence beneath miles of water. In this silence, the story begins. Submarines built to stalk the deep, built to conceal, built to survive, became victims of their own creation. They vanished into the same shadows they were made to inhabit. The Silent Service remains. A fleet of steel phantoms, some rusting in known graves, others still unaccounted for, adrift in a sea of speculation. Their missions ended not with triumph or defeat, but with absence. Their stories linger, whispered in classified files and family legacies, half told and half erased. The ocean remembers them, even when history forgets. For every submarine that returned, another vanished. For every record kept, another was destroyed. For every answer offered, another was withheld. The Silent Service is not only the beginning of this story, it is the heartbeat of the abyss itself. And in the abyss, silence is eternal. Chapter 2. The Forgotten Tombs of World War II. They called it the Silent War Beneath the Waves. A campaign hidden from the eyes of the world, where men vanished without trace, swallowed by the deep. During the Second World War, the ocean became more than a battlefield. It became a crypt. Hundreds of submarines set out on missions from which they never returned, leaving only unanswered reports, lost signals, and an echo of final breaths trapped in steel. The submarines of this era were machines of daring ambition. Crafted to prowl unseen, they crept beneath convoys, hunted carriers, and delivered unseen blows. Yet their silence, once their greatest weapon, became their eternal shroud. Records list them coldly: lost, missing, presumed sunk. Behind each entry was a crew, families waiting for news that would never come, and a war that devoured its sailors without mercy. Among these vanished vessels was the USS Grunion, an American submarine dispatched in 1942 to patrol the waters off the Aleutian Islands. She was new, untested, but entrusted with a dangerous mission to disrupt Japanese supply lines. For weeks, messages flowed back, reports of attacks, sinkings, victories in shadow. Then silence. No distress call, no survivor's account, only absence. Decades later, When her wreck was finally found, twisted in the silt of the Bering Sea, it revealed a violent death. A torpedo, fired in defense or desperation, may have circled back upon its creator. The ocean had entombed her crew, sealing their story in a coffin of iron. Across the Atlantic, the waters held another secret. The I-52, a Japanese submarine, was not hunting but transporting. Laden with gold, strategic metals, and codes, it voyaged toward Germany in 1944, bridging two empires of war. American intelligence had intercepted its path, and aircraft hunted it with sonar and depth charges. In the black of night, explosions shook the deep. The I-52 sank swiftly, its cargo lost to the abyss. When her wreck was rediscovered in the 1990s, more than treasure was revealed. Inside lay the hushed evidence of desperation, the attempt of one doomed empire to aid another, and the lives erased in silence. The tragedies were not confined to one nation. German U-boats, once feared phantoms of the Atlantic, met their own unseen ends. Dozens vanished in the murk, leaving behind only rumors' shadows, and the occasional oil slick that rose briefly to the surface before dissolving into nothing. Crews of hardened men, trapped in steel cylinders, became prisoners of pressure. Some were claimed by depth charges, others by malfunctions, fires, or the simplest cruelty of the sea. The water does not distinguish between victor and vanquished. In the Pacific, the USS Wahoo, commanded by the daring Dudley Mush Morton, gained fame for audacity, sinking dozens of enemy ships. Her final patrol in 1943 became legend, for she never returned. Only after the war did fragments of Japanese reports suggest her end, caught in a deadly net of aircraft and escorts, driven to the bottom by relentless pursuit. When her wreck was located decades later, the silent truth was laid bare, hull shattered, the promise of return extinguished. The sea, indifferent and vast, consumed these stories whole. It holds its secrets with a patience beyond human comprehension. Each submarine lost became both a weapon destroyed and a tomb created. Crews entombed within were denied even the dignity of burial on land. No headstones marked their resting places, only coordinates on charts, whispers among naval records, and the hollow word, missing. The toll was immense. In the U.S. Navy alone, 52 submarines were lost during the war. More than 3,500 sailors never came home. For Japan, the losses were even greater, their fleets stretched thin and consumed by relentless pursuit. Germany's U-boats, once the terror of Atlantic shipping, became death traps, sending thousands of men to silence beneath the waves. The numbers are staggering, but numbers do not capture the agony. Within each steel hull was laughter, routine, and a stubborn will to survive. Within each vanished vessel was the sound of men breathing recycled air, fighting fatigue, and carrying hope that was crushed without mercy. When the war ended, victory parades filled the streets of nations. But in the oceans, silence lingered. The submarines that had never returned remained absent from the celebrations. Families mourned in uncertainty, clinging to official notices that spoke of missing in action, knowing that the deep offered no reprieve. The war's forgotten tombs remained unseen, their crews encased in rust and darkness, their voices silenced forever. Decades later, as technology advanced, expeditions began to scour the seafloor. Sonar revealed shapes that no natural formation could produce: elongated shadows, broken spines, metallic ghosts resting where light cannot reach. Each discovery was a resurrection of memory, a confirmation of fate long suspected. Yet recovery was impossible. These were not wrecks to be salvaged. They were graves. Nations declared them sanctuaries, eternal resting places for those who perished within. The ocean floor has no marble, no carved epitaphs, no flowers laid by mourning hands. Its monuments are rusted hulls, corroded rivets, silent torpedo tubes. Its prayers are the endless currents whispering over steel. Its mourners are the passing whales, the drifting shoals, and the weight of time pressing ever deeper. The sea remembers in silence, holding its dead with a grip unbroken by decades. The forgotten tombs of World War II remain as testaments to both the triumph and futility of human endeavor. Submarines were built to hide, to stalk, to survive unseen. Yet the oceans outmatched them all. In their pursuit of stealth, they found eternal concealment. In their bid for dominance, they met the one adversary no man can defeat, the abyss itself. The sailors who descended into those halls did so knowing the risks. Every dive was a gamble against the crushing depths, every mission a wager against the sea. Their sacrifice was not witnessed on open fields or marked by soaring monuments. It was hidden, swallowed, entombed. And yet, in that hidden silence lies the weight of their story. For the war that raged above the waves ended with treaties and borders redrawn. But below, beneath the surface, the war never truly ended. The wrecks remain, eternal echoes of conflict, sealed within the world's greatest graveyard. These are the forgotten tombs of World War II steel coffins scattered across oceans, monuments not of stone but of silence. They endure not in glory but in tragedy, reminders of a war fought not only on land and in the sky, but in the dark places where light does not reach. The submarines vanished without farewell, their crews forever unreturned, their stories whispered only by the sea. Chapter 3. Cold War Shadows. The war that followed the Second World War was not declared in banners or parades. It was waged in silence, in shadows, in oceans that stretched from pole to pole. The Cold War created a new breed of submarine machines, no longer tasked only with hunting convoys or merchant fleets, but with carrying weapons that could annihilate cities, technologies that could pierce the secrets of the deep, and men sworn to missions that could never be spoken of aloud. These vessels prowled the oceans not as hunters of ships, but as guardians of nations' final threats. Within their hulls lay ballistic missiles tipped with nuclear fire, sonar arrays that reached into the abyss, listening for whispers of an enemy thousands of miles away. Each patrol was a paradox, an attempt to deter war by sailing with enough power to end civilization. Yet with such stakes, every disappearance carried the weight of catastrophe. In 1963, the USS Thresher was hailed as one of the most advanced submarines in the world. A symbol of American engineering, she was designed to dive deeper, move quieter, and survive longer than any vessel before her. But during deep dive tests off the coast of New England, she never surfaced. Messages crackled into silence. A muffled transmission, experiencing minor difficulties, was the last trace. Hours later, debris floated to the surface. Shattered steel, fragments of a dream. The Thresher and her crew of 129 men had been claimed by the depths. Official reports spoke of faulty welds, failed pipes, and inability to withstand the crushing pressure. Yet the Thresher's loss became more than a tragedy. It became a symbol of the fragility behind Cold War certainty. A weapon meant to project dominance had instead revealed vulnerability wrapped in secrecy. Families were given explanations measured in vague technicalities, while the Navy cloaked its failures in classification. The truth sank with the vessel. Just 5 years later, the USS Scorpion embarked on a routine mission in the Atlantic. She was a nuclear-powered submarine armed with torpedoes, capable of tracking Soviet movements across the sea. But in May of 1968, she vanished. No mayday, no warning. 2 months later, her wreck was located 3,000 meters below the surface. Fractured into pieces, her hull twisted like a broken rib cage. All 99 men aboard were gone. The official cause remained elusive. Theories circulated. A malfunctioning torpedo detonating within the vessel. An accidental implosion triggered by mechanical failure. Even whispers of a Soviet attack, denied by both sides but never fully dismissed. In an era defined by suspicion, The Scorpion became more than a submarine. It became a question mark buried in the abyss, a Cold War secret that neither superpower wished to illuminate. The Soviets suffered their own losses. Submarines like the K-129, a ballistic missile vessel, disappeared in the Pacific under equally mysterious circumstances in 1968. To Moscow, it was a national tragedy, a blow to pride and power. To Washington, it was an opportunity. The wreck was located by American surveillance, and in a project shrouded in extraordinary secrecy, the CII sought to raise the submarine from the seafloor. Using a specially constructed vessel, under the guise of commercial mining, they attempted to haul the shattered corpse of the K-129 into daylight. Part of it was lifted, part of it was lost. The operation was denied for decades, the truth buried in redacted documents and whispered rumors. The Cold War oceans were not just battlefields. They were theaters of espionage, deception, and silent theft. As both sides armed their submarines with nuclear arsenals, the line between safety and disaster narrowed to nothing. A single failure could ignite a catastrophe. Sailors lived in claustrophobic silence, knowing that one miscalculation, one spark, could not only kill them, but drag the world into ruin. The paranoia was palpable. Every ping of sonar could be the signal of pursuit. Every unexpected noise could herald death. Every patrol beneath the polar ice or in contested seas carried with it the shadow of annihilation. The Cold War was a war of secrets, and the oceans became its perfect accomplice. Submarines vanished not only into water, but into silence, their ends hidden beneath classification stamps, their wrecks mapped but unacknowledged, their stories sealed from the public. Families waited for closure that never came, receiving only fragments. A folded flag, a line in a report, a name inscribed on a memorial. The oceans themselves became saturated with these unspoken tragedies. Steel hulls now rest in darkness, reactors sealed under miles of water, torpedoes and missiles still slumbering in the cold. The sea holds not just the dead, but the potential for destruction locked within their sunken arsenals. These are not mere wrecks. They are tombs of men and monuments of fear, relics of a conflict that never erupted into open war, but simmered, always on the edge of fire. The Cold War made the oceans a chessboard, its pieces invisible, its moves silent, its sacrifices unacknowledged. Every submarine that disappeared did so beneath a veil of suspicion, a fog that refused to lift even decades later. Nations wrote their official explanations with caution, revealing just enough to quiet questions while withholding what lay beneath. In this silence, conspiracies thrived. Whispers of sabotage, of espionage gone wrong, of underwater collisions never admitted, lingered long after the reports had been filed. The Thresher, the Scorpion, the K-129, these were not isolated losses. They were symbols. Each became a wound in the psyche of its nation, a reminder that mastery of the sea was fragile, that even the most advanced technologies were vulnerable to failure, to accident, or to forces never named aloud. They endure in memory as shadows, fragments of a war fought in whispers, carried out by men who sailed into depths from which there was no return. The Cold War ended in treaties, in the collapse of empires, in shifting borders and ideologies. Yet beneath the water, its legacy persists. Nuclear submarines still patrol unseen, descendants of those lost in silence. The wrecks of the vanished still rest where they fell, locked in darkness, their secrets guarded by pressure, steel, and the silence of the abyss. They remain as shadows of a time defined by paranoia, their stories half told, their truths entombed. The Cold War left no monuments at sea, only scattered tombs of iron, classified memories, and ghosts that never surfaced. Chapter 4. The K-129 Mystery. In March of 1968, silence fell over a Soviet submarine that carried within it not only men and weapons, but the dignity of an empire. The vessel was the K-129, a diesel-electric ballistic missile submarine patrolling the cold waters of the Pacific. She had been designed to deliver nuclear firepower across continents, a weapon of deterrence cloaked in shadows. Yet on her final patrol, she did not return. The Soviet Navy waited for signals that never came. No distress call reached the surface. No beacon announced her fate. Only absence remained. To the outside world, the loss was unspoken. But beneath the tension of the Cold War, the disappearance of K-129 was more than tragedy. It was a crack in the facade of Soviet strength. The wreck lay 3 miles beneath the surface, crushed into the seafloor, her crew of 98 entombed forever. The cause of her sinking was never declared. Whispers of an on-board explosion, a catastrophic failure, or even a secret collision with an American submarine lingered in the void where official truth should have stood. Each explanation carried political weight, and so the silence deepened. But in Washington, the silence was not an end. It was an opportunity. The United States had tracked the submarine's final moments through its vast web of hydrophones, underwater ears, built to listen for Soviet movements. With the position of the wreck known, a decision was made. What lay on the ocean floor was not just steel, but secrets, nuclear missiles, encrypted communications, codes, and the technology of an adversary. The Americans saw more than a grave. They saw a prize. Thus began Project Azorian, a covert operation unlike anything attempted before. Its goal, to raise a sunken Soviet submarine from depths where no human hand was meant to reach. Publicly, there could be no acknowledgement. The mission had to be cloaked beneath layers of deception. And so the CIA turned to industry, disguising espionage as enterprise. The cover story was brilliant in its audacity. Billionaire Howard Hughes, known for his eccentric projects and ventures, would serve as the public face of the operation. His company announced plans for a vessel called the Hughes Glomar Explorer, allegedly built for mining the seafloor, harvesting valuable minerals from the deep. Newspapers reported on futuristic technology, on grand ambitions of oceanic exploration. Few questioned the spectacle. Beneath the surface of the story, however, lay one of the most daring acts of espionage ever conceived. In truth, the Glomar Explorer was constructed to do one thing: descend into the black water and seize the broken body of the K-129. A massive claw, called the capture vehicle, was engineered to reach down 3 miles, lock around the submarine's hull, and lift it intact into the ship's hold. It was a task that pushed engineering to its very limits. The abyssal pressures were immense, the logistics staggering, the secrecy absolute. In 1974, the operation was launched. The Glomar Explorer sailed to the site under the guise of deep-sea mining, watched carefully by Soviet ships that circled, suspicious but uncertain. The claw descended into darkness, guided by cameras and instruments, until it clasped the shattered remains of K-129. Slowly, with infinite care, it began to rise. But the ocean does not surrender easily. As the submarine ascended, disaster struck. The massive steel claw failed under the strain. Sections of the vessel slipped free, tumbling back into darkness. Reports suggest that only a fragment of the submarine was retrieved, its forward section, along with a portion of its crew. The rest was lost, swallowed once more by the abyss. What was recovered remains a matter of speculation. Some claim that nuclear warheads and codebooks were secured. Others suggest that the true prize was intelligence locked in machinery, encrypted systems, and the bodies of Soviet sailors who carried with them the symbols of an empire. The CIA spoke little, offering no certainty. The truth was submerged beneath layers of classification, marked by silence. The operation itself could not remain hidden forever. Journalists uncovered fragments of the story, piecing together whispers of espionage and salvage. Yet even then, secrecy prevailed. When asked, the CIA offered its now famous response. It could neither confirm nor deny the existence of Project Azorian. That phrase Glomar response entered the lexicon as a symbol of Cold War opacity, a phrase that concealed as much as it revealed. For the families of the men entombed in K-129, closure never came. The Soviet Union maintained its silence, unwilling to admit vulnerability, unwilling to acknowledge the humiliation of its submarine, raised or half-raised by its rival. For the United States, the operation remained a triumph unspoken, an intelligence haul cloaked in mystery. What was found, what was lost, what was learned, all remains hidden in the vaults of secrecy. Beneath the silence, however, lingers something more human. Reports suggest that when remains of the crew were recovered, the CIA performed a quiet ceremony at sea. In the stillness of the Pacific, men who had been enemies were given a burial with honors, their coffins lowered into the water, their fates bound forever to the abyss. The footage of that ceremony, declassified decades later, revealed not strategy or espionage, but tragedy. Faces long forgotten were returned to the sea, the silence honored, if not explained. The mystery of K-129 endures. To this day, the precise cause of her sinking is unknown. The Soviet Union claimed mechanical failure, while others whispered of collision or sabotage. American officials remained guarded, their words measured, their files redacted. The abyss does not yield its secrets easily. K-129 rests still in the Pacific, her story divided between fragments lifted into the light and shadows that remain untouched. She is a monument not only to Cold War rivalry, but to the power of silence itself, silence wielded as strategy, silence that conceals truth, silence that defines history. Project Azorian was hailed as a feat of engineering, but it was also a parable of the age. The Cold War was fought not in open battle, but in clandestine struggles, in secrets raised from the deep, in truths half revealed and half buried. The ocean floor became a stage where nations tested not only their technologies, but their ability to cloak ambition in myth. The K-129 mystery is not just a story of a submarine lost and found. It is the story of secrecy elevated to an art form, of intelligence turned into theater, of a graveyard turned into a battlefield without fire. It is a reminder that in the Cold War, the greatest power was not always in what was spoken, but in what remained hidden, locked away, submerged beneath miles of water and decades of silence. Chapter 5, USS Scorpion, The Vanished Wolf. In the spring of 1968, a hunter of the deep turned into prey. The USS Scorpion, a nuclear-powered attack submarine, designated SSN 589, slipped quietly into the Atlantic. She was called a wolf of the seas, fast and deadly, a prowling shadow armed with torpedoes and nuclear secrets. 99 men served within her steel skin, bound by silence, bound by duty. She was expected to return. She never did. Her disappearance came at a time already soaked in tension. That same year, the Soviet submarine K-129 had been lost in the Pacific, and the Cold War churned with paranoia. Both superpowers hunted each other's shadows, chasing secrets beneath the waves. But when the Scorpion failed to report in May 1968, the ocean claimed more than just another vessel. It claimed certainty itself. The search for her began with strained urgency. The Navy dispatched ships across the Atlantic, combing the waves for signals, wreckage, anything at all. For days, only silence answered. The Scorpion had simply vanished. Weeks later, her wreck was found at a depth of nearly 10,000 feet, 400 miles southwest of the Azores. She lay broken upon the seafloor, a shattered wolf caged forever in the dark. What happened inside her final hours remains one of the great mysteries of the sea. Official reports spoke of possible mechanical failure. Some suggested a torpedo may have malfunctioned, turning predator into prey. The Mark 37 torpedoes aboard were electrically driven, capable of self-arming if a fault triggered. In one theory, a rogue torpedo circled back toward the Scorpion, igniting a fatal chain of destruction. Yet the evidence, crushed beneath tons of ocean, could never fully confirm the horror. Others whispered of darker possibilities. The Cold War was a theater of shadows, where silence hid not only loss but suspicion. Some believed the Scorpion may have been intercepted, even destroyed, by Soviet forces. At the time, NATO and Soviet fleets shadowed each other constantly. Every movement was watched, every silence weighed. For those who distrusted the simplicity of mechanical failure, the possibility of Soviet involvement became a specter that refused to fade. The wreck itself bore scars that fed the speculation. Imagery of the crushed hull showed sections collapsed inward, as if struck by immense force. To some, it looked like implosion. To others, it looked like attack. Official boards of inquiry examined the wreckage, but their conclusions were fractured, their words carefully chosen. Nothing definitive, nothing final. Just fragments, scattered like debris on the seafloor. For the families of the 99 men, answers never came. They were given words but not truths, condolences but not certainty. Children grew into adults with only whispers of what became of their fathers. Wives were left with folded flags and the gnawing ache of absence. The Scorpion's loss was a wound that never healed because it was never explained. The silence around the tragedy deepened suspicion. Classified files remained locked away, testimony withheld, conclusions redacted. In the shadows of the Cold War, secrecy was as much a weapon as missiles or torpedoes. To admit weakness, to reveal error, to confirm hostile engagement, all carried consequences too dangerous to risk. And so, the Scorpion's death was buried in silence, her story left unfinished. Yet fragments of the truth leaked over time. Acoustic surveillance systems, the same vast web of hydrophones that tracked Soviet submarines, recorded the Scorpion's final moments. Analysts heard a sharp acoustic event, consistent with an explosion. Some interpreted it as the detonation of a torpedo. Others as the implosion of the hull, collapsing under pressure as the submarine descended past its limits. The sounds carried tragedy, but no clarity. Each theory added weight to the mystery rather than resolving it. The Scorpion became more than a vessel lost. She became a symbol of unresolved fear. For the men who served on other submarines, her disappearance was a reminder that even the hunters were vulnerable. The ocean did not care for skill, loyalty, or steel. In her darkness, even the strongest machines could break. Even the most vigilant crews could vanish. For strategists and politicians, the Scorpion was a ghost woven into intelligence briefings and secret discussions. For the Navy, she was a reminder of vulnerabilities too dangerous to publicize. And for families, she was a tomb sealed in black water, beyond reach, beyond explanation. Decades later, when images of her wreck were released, they offered only haunting silence. The broken hull, split and scattered, revealed nothing definitive. No single truth emerged from the darkness. The wreck of the Scorpion remains on the seabed, radioactive from the nuclear reactor that once powered her, guarded by the sea that swallows all secrets. The vanished wolf remains a story of absence. Absence of proof, absence of closure, absence of truth. In the Cold War, silence was strategy, but for the Scorpion, silence became fate. Her men rest in eternal night, their voices unheard, their story untold. Theories echo above the waves, but the sea keeps its secrets. A USS Scorpion was not the first submarine to vanish, nor the last. But her loss came at a time when fear was currency and secrecy a weapon. It is why her story endures, not as a tale of tragedy alone, but as a reminder of how the ocean and politics conspire to bury truth. Today, she lies southwest of the Azores, a broken wolf in the dark, her reactor cold, her torpedoes stilled, her crew entombed. Her story continues to haunt because it lacks an ending. Theories circle like predators, but the truth never surfaces. The Scorpion remains missing, not in body, but in certainty. The vanished wolf is more than wreckage on the seafloor. She is a warning. She is a reminder that the most dangerous silence is not the silence of the deep, but the silence of unanswered questions and the silence of truths that may never be revealed. Chapter 6. Ghost Signals. The ocean is not silent. Beneath its pressure and blackness, it breathes in frequencies, groans with shifting tectonics, murmurs with volcanic veins. To human ears, this is a world without voice. But to machines that listen, the abyss is a vast archive of sound, a language written in echoes. During the long shadow of the Cold War, men built networks of hydrophones stretched across ocean basins. These ears of steel were meant to catch the stealth of submarines, to track the slow prowl of enemies hidden beneath. What they recorded was not always clear. Some signals were catalogued and filed away, explained as whales or distant ships. Others resisted explanation. Others told of endings. The sonar rooms became places where death was heard before it was known. In May of 1968, hydroacoustic stations in the Atlantic picked up a violent, crushing sound. It began as a low-frequency groan and fractured into a rapid series of metallic shrieks. Analysts would later describe it as an implosion, the sound of a pressure hull collapsing under the weight of a mile of water. Within days, the USS Scorpion was declared overdue. It would be months before its wreckage was found, resting broken on the seabed. But the ocean had announced its death before any admiral dared confirm it. Such sounds became the ghosts of vanished fleets. A single burst, a fading pulse, or a half-finished transmission. These were the epitaphs written in the medium of the deep. The USS Thresher left behind its own echo. In 1963, while undergoing deep-diving tests, it descended too far. The hydrophone arrays captured what happened. First the hum of propellers, then static, then a sharp acoustic bloom followed by silence. Analysts replayed it again and again, listening not only to the collapse of steel, but to the extinguishing of 129 lives. For decades, those classified tapes were studied in whispers, as though the sound itself carried a haunting. But not all signals were so direct. Some remain unsolved, fragments whose sources cannot be matched with any confirmed wreck. Operators reported phantom pings, unexplained bursts of metallic resonance, echoes that came from places where no submarine should have been. Were they errors in equipment? The reverberation of distant seismic activity? The Pacific holds its share of these mysteries. During the late 1960s, the hydrophone network recorded faint, irregular clatters that did not match whales, storms, or known craft. Analysts noted the possibility of a Soviet submarine in distress, but no such incident was ever acknowledged. Some speculated it could have been the dying breath of K-129 before its final descent. Others insisted it was something else entirely, a vessel unrecorded, its identity deliberately obscured. The reports were marked classified and filed away. The ocean had spoken, but its words were not for the public ear. What unsettled many who worked with these signals was the human element hidden within them. The ocean did not simply carry the collapse of hulls. It carried interrupted communication, truncated voices. Radio men spoke of signals cut mid-sentence, of Morse code transmissions ending in abrupt silence. Somewhere in that silence was the final thought of a man trapped within a dying vessel, carried into static, dissolved into water. Over time, these ghost signals acquired a reputation among sailors and analysts alike. They were studied clinically, but spoken of in hushed tones, as if acknowledging them too openly invited the curse of the abyss. They were reminders that in submarine warfare, disappearance was not a matter of if, but when. For every machine that descended, there was the possibility of a signal that would be its only obituary. The dread lay in the patterns. Time and again, implosion signatures began the same way. A faint groan, a crack, then a rush of noise as compartments collapsed in sequence. It was the anatomy of catastrophe rendered in sound. Once recognized, it could not be unheard. Operators could tell instantly whether a vessel had died, long before its wreck was ever found. And yet, not all sounds ended with confirmation. Some implosion events remain officially unlinked to any submarine. The records sit in archives, catalogued as unidentified events. Their true stories perhaps buried in classified files, or still resting in the dark with the wrecks themselves. Even stranger were the metallic echoes that seemed to repeat without cause. One such case occurred in the North Atlantic during the mid-1970s, when hydrophones registered a faint series of rhythmic pings. They came at intervals consistent with active sonar, yet there were no friendly submarines in the area, and no enemy craft were ever reported. For days the echoes persisted, then ceased. Some insisted it was simply a malfunction, a phantom caused by faulty equipment. Others whispered of a submarine long lost, still trying to announce its position from the grave. To those who listened for a living, these anomalies became personal burdens. They carried the weight of unseen tragedies, of men entombed in silence, but still heard in fragments. A sonar operator might replay a recording again and again, trying to extract meaning from static, as if listening hard enough could rewrite the ending. But the abyss gives nothing back. It only takes and leaves behind traces just cruel enough to remind the living of what they lost. The ghost signals remain etched into history as the faintest evidence of disasters governments were slow to admit or chose never to acknowledge at all. They exist in the gray space between certainty and secrecy. To the families who waited on shorelines, they were never played, never shared. To them, silence was delivered instead of sound. And so the ocean holds two truths. The visible one, steel hulls lying in twisted ruin on the seabed, graves of men who never surfaced. And the invisible one, recordings stored in vaults, tapes of echoes that no one outside the circle of secrecy will ever hear. Together they form a dual tomb, one of steel, one of sound. In the end, it is the silence that remains most haunting. A submarine may vanish, its hull broken and hidden from sight. But for a moment, a fleeting instant before the dark consumes it fully, the ocean speaks its death aloud. The abyss whispers the story, and then swallows it whole. Ghost signals reminders that nothing in the deep is truly silent, and yet nothing is ever fully explained. Chapter 7. The Human Cost. Steel may sink, and oceans may keep their secrets, but the true weight of vanished submarines is not measured in tons of wreckage. It is measured in lives left waiting, in families suspended in a silence that never ended. The telegrams were always short. A handful of words typed in black ink. Missing, overdue, lost with all hands. Cold phrases crafted to carry unbearable truths. For the wives, the children, the parents, there was nothing more. No body returned. No grave to visit. Only absence, vast and unending, like the ocean itself. In kitchens and living rooms, the waiting began. A wife might leave the porch light on, a beacon for a husband who would never walk up the steps again. A child might keep a father's cap on the dresser, convinced he would return to reclaim it. The silence that seeped into those homes was as suffocating as the water that had entombed the submariners. The Navy offered little beyond official words. In an era of secrecy, even the circumstances of a sinking were withheld. Families were told nothing of implosion sounds or of signals cut short. They were told only to endure. Behind drawn curtains, grief was swallowed like salt water. The USS Thresher left behind 129 families. In Portsmouth, New Hampshire, the shipyard town fell into mourning. Entire streets bore black ribbons on their doors. Schoolrooms went quiet as children realized their fathers were never coming home. At memorial services, the hymns could not disguise the void, the strange reality of loss without witness. The men had vanished where no one could follow. When the USS Scorpion disappeared in 1968, 99 families entered the same purgatory. Months passed before debris was located. By then, wives had already learned the cruel art of waiting for news that never arrived. They gathered in support groups, writing letters to officials who replied in the language of caution and secrecy. What the government could not explain, it concealed. The burden of not knowing became a permanent inheritance. In the Soviet Union, the grief was no less sharp, but it was borne under an even heavier cloak of silence. When K-129 failed to return, families received little more than vague assurances. Officially, the matter was closed, though the truth was anything but. Wives were discouraged from asking questions. Mothers were urged to accept the silence as duty. Yet inside those homes, the pain was raw. Photographs became relics. Children grew up with shadows for fathers. Psychologists later spoke of ambiguous loss, the kind of grief that cannot resolve itself because the ending is obscured. These families were neither widows nor wives, neither orphans nor children of the living. They existed in between, in a suspended state where closure never arrived. For some, it became a wound that hardened into silence of their own, passed down through generations. There were stories of wives who kept closets untouched for decades, uniforms still hanging, boots still polished, as if time itself could be held still. There were children who slept with radios under their pillows, straining to hear the voice of a father calling back from the static. There were parents who sat by windows every evening, staring toward seas their sons would never rise from. And then there was the other silence, the silence of secrecy. Governments, desperate to shield military failures, buried details deep in classified archives. Families were forced to live with unanswered questions. Was it an accident? A malfunction? A confrontation never admitted? They carried suspicion alongside sorrow, unable to separate the truth from the lies. The ocean had taken their loved ones, but it was human secrecy that kept them from knowing how. For the survivors, those who missed the last voyage by chance, the guilt was its own torment. Some lived their lives as if haunted, speaking of phantom knocks at the door or dreams of drowning in steel corridors. To survive was to be marked, to feel as though you were living someone else's allotted days. At memorials, the words were always the same: sacrifice, service, honor. But behind the solemn rituals were private griefs that could not be spoken aloud. In the silence after the hymns faded, the true cost was revealed. Empty chairs at kitchen tables, birthdays passed without fathers, marriages ended in photographs. The sea does not give back its dead. Families of submariners learned to mourn the unseen, to imagine the cold steel tombs beneath the waves. Some found solace in believing the ocean itself became a grave, vast, and eternal. Others found no solace at all. The submarines became monuments not only to strategy and secrecy, but to sorrow. Each wreck resting on the seabed was a steel coffin filled with unspoken stories. The world remembers them as vessels, as names on plaques. But in the homes they left behind, they were laughter, touch, and presence taken by the deep, leaving behind silence too heavy to bear. It is said the ocean has two kinds of silence, the silence of depth and the silence of grief. For the families of the lost, those silences became one. The abyss stretched into their lives, an invisible presence at every meal, every holiday, every quiet moment alone. Generations later, the weight remains. Children of the lost grew old, still wondering what became of their fathers. Wives who remarried carried photographs of men they could never bury. Parents went to their own graves without knowing the truth. The submarines were lost once to the sea, and then again to memory. This is the human cost of vanished fleets. Not only the implosions heard in hydroacoustic reports, not only the steel twisted in darkness, but the lives lived in waiting, the grief without end, the silence that echoes louder than sound. The oceans may hide their wrecks, nations may hide their truths, but the silence that followed these men ashore was impossible to contain. It seeped into families, into generations, into history itself. The human cost of vanished submarines is not measured in strategy, nor in secrecy, nor in the rivalries of nations. It is measured in the absence of fathers, the loneliness of widows, the empty spaces at tables and in hearts. It is measured in silence, and silence endures. Chapter 8. Technology Buried in Darkness. The ocean floor is not only a graveyard of steel and silence. It is also a vault. Beneath the silt and darkness lie machines designed to outpace the imagination of their age. Submarines that sank did not only take men with them, they carried secrets, inventions, and weapons locked forever in the abyss. During the Cold War, technology advanced in secrecy, shielded from public eyes. Submarines became test beds for propulsion systems meant to rewrite naval warfare. For sonar arrays capable of listening across oceans, for nuclear payloads designed not just to strike, but to vanish into the sea and wait in silence. Some of these vessels, swallowed by the depths, rest their still entombed prototypes, whose blueprints remain sealed inside their rusting hulls. The USS Thresher carried classified sonar technology, hardware never recovered, never revealed. The USS Scorpion was rumored to have been testing experimental torpedoes, devices whispered to be unstable, perhaps lethal to their own crew. In the Pacific, the Soviet K-129 sank with nuclear missiles aboard, their warheads settling into silence thousands of feet below the surface. Each wreck became both tomb and time capsule, holding secrets more dangerous than the ships themselves. Speculation haunts the stories. What weapons rest intact, sealed away by pressure and darkness? What propulsion systems, perhaps never replicated, now lie as blueprints of the abyss? These submarines were designed as shadows machines meant to glide unseen. Their disappearance only deepened their secrecy, turning them into myths half forgotten and half whispered by those who once knew. Recovery operations have been attempted. Project Azorian, mounted by the United States, sought to raise part of K-129 from the seafloor in the 1970s. Beneath the cover of a mining expedition, engineers attempted to lift Soviet technology from 3 miles beneath the Pacific. The world was told it was a failure, that only fragments were recovered. But fragments of what? Official answers remain locked, the silence of governments echoing the silence of the sea. The abyss is patient. Technology does not dissolve as swiftly as memory. Steel corrodes slowly in the deep's cold grip, electronics preserved in the crushing stillness. What now lies sealed in those iron coffins may outlive the men who designed them. Perhaps future divers, or machines built to endure those depths, will stumble upon these relics, pulling from the seabed inventions their creators never wanted revealed. There are stories whispered among naval circles, rumors of signals picked up from wrecks thought silent, pings of old beacons, sonar echoes bouncing from structures no longer in use, metallic ghosts that refuse to vanish. Some claim these are nothing but echoes, distortions in the water. Others insist they are evidence that some systems remain alive, buried but not extinguished, still transmitting into the dark. Every submarine carried more than crew and weapons. They carried data, intelligence gathered in silence, records of patrols, maps of undersea cables, reports written to be read only by generals and presidents. When the vessels vanished, that knowledge vanished with them. To this day, no one can know how much remains hidden in those iron vaults. The abyss, indifferent and eternal, guards both lives and information. It is easy to imagine those wrecks as tombs only of men. But in truth, they are tombs of possibility. Technologies that may have altered the course of naval warfare now lie beyond reach. Perhaps some were lost to failure, never to be attempted again. Perhaps some were too successful, and their disappearance became convenient. The silence of the deep ocean allows speculation to grow unchecked. To explore the ocean is to brush against secrecy itself. The water hides, protects, and buries. A submarine vanishing into that vastness is not only a tragedy, but a concealment. Secrets of propulsion, of sonar, of nuclear force, of intelligence. They lie in the same darkness as the bones of sailors. Nations remember the men in ceremonies, but the machines and the secrets they carried remain unspoken. What rests at the bottom of the sea may be more than wreckage. It may be history itself, locked away deliberately or lost by chance. The ocean floor is littered not just with the remnants of conflict, but with knowledge never returned. And so, as the decades pass, the submarines remain. Their hulls cracked, their steel warped, but their secrets intact. The abyss holds them tightly, refusing to give them back. Governments deny, families mourn. The world above continues forward. Yet in the silence of the deep, those secrets wait buried in darkness, preserved in pressure, guarded by the weight of an ocean. The submarines were designed to vanish. They achieved their purpose, but in their vanishing, they became something else. Silent vaults of invention, time capsules of technology, sealed away by tragedy and silence. The abyss is more than water. It is an archive, and its records remain sealed in steel coffins on the ocean floor. Chapter 9. Ghosts Still Waiting. The ocean does not forget. Every descent into its depths uncovers not only fragments of steel, but the weight of memory. Modern technology, sonar mapping, remotely operated vehicles, and deep-sea cameras has begun to shine a light into places once unreachable. Yet the light does not erase the shadows. For every wreck rediscovered, dozens remain absent, swallowed whole by the immensity of water and time. The USS Grunion, lost in 1942, remained a rumor until 2007, when its twisted remains were finally found resting on the Aleutian seabed. For decades, it was a phantom ship spoken of in speculation. Its rediscovery brought closure, but also unease. It lay in silence for more than 60 years, waiting to be seen again. The I-52, a Japanese submarine sunk in 1944 while carrying gold and military cargo to Germany, was discovered 5 kilometers below the Atlantic surface. Its hull, once a vessel of war, now resembled a tomb sealed in eternity. Each discovery reopens the same shadow. If these can be found, what are the others still missing? The USS Thresher, entombed in 1963, its steel imploded by the pressure of failure. The French Minerve, lost in 1968, rediscovered only half a century later. Some have surfaced in memory, pulled into light by machines. Others remain in silence, beyond the reach of modern probes, beyond explanation. The missing are more than numbers. Each absent vessel represents a question mark carved into history, but sealed in silence by the ocean's refusal to return them. They are both witnesses and secrets, their steel frames resting as evidence of something never fully told. Families hold ceremonies, nations declare remembrance, yet the true stories remain unwritten, lying beneath miles of water where only darkness keeps vigil. The abyss is selective. Some wrecks it reveals, others it keeps. The reasons remain hidden. Natural disaster, human error, hostile fire. These explanations circle the surface, but cannot touch the silence that endures. In that silence grows imagination, and in imagination, suspicion. The ocean as gravekeeper is also the ocean as conspirator. Its black vaults hold everything, but return almost nothing. When expeditions descend, they enter not only pressure and darkness, but the weight of time itself. Submarines like the USS Scorpion, still lying broken in the Atlantic, are visited by machines yet untouched by divers. Cameras reveal glimpses. Torn steel, shattered compartments, fragments of lives ended in a single moment. These images stir unease. They do not answer. They do not close the story. They only remind the living of what waits below. For every confirmed wreck, there are others that never reappear. The Soviet submarine K-129, lost in 1968, was partially raised, partially concealed, and still partly missing. The USS Wahoo, The HMS Urge, the countless vessels recorded as lost, cause unknown, each remains a specter of possibility. The ocean buries not only bodies and machines, but certainty itself. Each new discovery is a reminder of absence. The more the ocean gives, the more it withholds. In the silence of the abyss, the missing multiply in meaning. Were they taken by accident, by failure, by violence unseen? Or do they remain missing for reasons too disruptive, too destabilizing, to ever be admitted? The ocean holds dominion over memory. It is both graveyard and museum, though its exhibits are sealed in blackness and pressure. Each submarine lying in darkness is a ghost still waiting, its presence felt in absence, its silence louder than any explanation. The discoveries are haunting not only for what they reveal, but for what they imply, that the ocean chooses when and if its vaults will be opened. Wrecks preserved in cold darkness emerge like ghosts surfacing from a dream, only when the abyss allows. Until then, they remain prisoners of time and water, their stories unfinished, their endings untold. And so, history hangs in suspension. Maps mark locations with coordinates and depths, but vast stretches of sea remain blank. In those spaces lie steel tombs never seen, voices never heard again, technology locked away by chance or by choice. These wrecks are not only remnants of war or accident, they are fragments of a hidden narrative, a story the ocean has chosen not to share. The abyss is patient. It can wait centuries to release its secrets, or hold them forever. And until it decides, the missing remain more than wrecks. They are phantoms, ghosts still waiting, shadows lingering in the folds of the ocean's black shroud. Chapter 10. Exposed. The abyss never forgets. They say time erases all wounds, that the sea smooths the scars of war and swallows the noise of ambition. But the abyss does not forget. It holds on to everything, every secret, every mistake, every dream that dared descend into its depths. Where the land forgets, the ocean remembers. And what it remembers, it never releases. The vanished submarines are not just wrecks lost to pressure and tide. They are monuments to the double edge of human desire, the hunger to explore and the compulsion to dominate. Men forged steel, armed it with the sharpest tools of destruction, and hurled it into the dark. But the ocean, older and infinitely patient, reminded them of their limits. With silence, with depth, with crushing certainty, it claimed them. Each submarine carried more than sailors. They carried fragments of eras, fragments of secrets, fragments of fears unspoken. Some bore experimental engines, crafted in whispers of laboratories. Some bore weapons never admitted to the public record. Others bore only the quiet intentions of intelligence, hidden circuits designed to listen where no one else could hear. These fragments rest now in tombs of steel, twisted by time, locked beneath sediments that no human hand may ever reach. And yet, though the world above spins on, though generations rise and fall, the abyss still holds its witnesses. In that silence, each vanished vessel becomes a ghost. Their rusted hulls groan beneath currents. Their once bright dials lie buried in silt, their stories unspoken but unforgotten. The abyss cradles them not as refuse, but as testimony. Testimony that mankind cannot master the deep, cannot bury ambition without consequence, cannot erase its own arrogance. The ocean remembers accidents masked as triumph. It remembers sailors whose names were erased in cover-ups. It remembers the governments that built tombs in secret and looked away when those tombs descended into eternity. The abyss remembers because it does not forgive. Every rivet that burst, every oxygen tank that failed, every sonar ping that echoed unanswered, it is all etched into the silence below. And silence, here, is not emptiness. It is presence. It is weight. It is the kind of silence that presses against the chest, reminding those who dare to listen that nothing is truly gone, not even when it is unseen. The abyss is the keeper of unfinished stories, Above, memorials are built, flags are folded, names are carved into stone. And yet, for every stone above, there is a tomb below that remains sealed by water. For every prayer whispered into wind, there is a soul whose last breath was surrendered to pressure and darkness. The ocean is not cruel, but it is absolute. In its embrace, nothing escapes. In the depths, the line between discovery and disappearance blurs. Some wrecks resurface in the gaze of cameras, brought back into the collective memory of nations, but many remain hidden. They linger in darkness where no sonar reaches, where no expedition dares, where silence is thicker than the hulls that once resisted it. These are the wrecks that remind us of the abyss's choice, that it reveals only what it wishes, that some truths will never ascend again. And this is where dread settles, not in what we have found, but in what remains unexposed. What lies beneath the propulsion systems that never reached history books, the encrypted communications never decoded, the bones of sailors unnamed, are fragments of knowledge that humanity will never reclaim. Knowledge that may have altered wars, altered nations, altered futures. The abyss keeps them, not with violence, but with inevitability. We call it loss, but the abyss calls it memory. We call it tragedy, but the abyss calls it balance. We call it silence, but the abyss knows it is truth. Every submarine entombed beneath the waves is more than a machine. It is a mirror, reflecting the fragility of ambition. Steel bends, circuits fail, men break, but the abyss endures. It watches, as it has since the first vessel dared descend. It does not rush. It does not age. It waits, as patient as eternity. And so, when we peer into the waters, we are not just looking for what is lost. We are standing before a vast archive. An archive that remembers better than we do. An archive that holds the weight of our forgotten wars, our hidden experiments, our unspoken mistakes. We look, hoping to extract answers, but the abyss offers only reminders. Reminders that progress without humility leads to silence. That ambition without caution leads to graves. That secrets, no matter how carefully buried, are always preserved somewhere beyond our reach. The abyss is not empty. It is full of what we leave behind, full of what we deny, full of what we fail to understand. It carries the voices of men who will never be heard again, their last words pressed into the stillness of water. It carries the weight of knowledge no hand may recover, locked in darkness where even light cannot intrude. And so, the vanished submarines are not endings, but echoes. Echoes that remind us of our scale, our arrogance, our mortality. Each one is a sentence in the ocean's vast scripture, a scripture written in pressure and silence, in steel and bone. The abyss does not ask for remembrance. It does not care for monuments or histories written in books. It carries its own remembrance, perfect and immutable. We may forget, nations may deny, families may pass, but the abyss never forgets. And in that knowledge lies dread, the dread of knowing that we are not the keepers of our own history, that the truest record lies in silence, beyond reach, beyond light, beyond recovery. The abyss remembers for us, it remembers against us, and it remembers forever. In the end, the submarines remain. Their stories remain. The abyss does not release. It does not forgive. It only waits. And so, as we close the final page, we return to where we began, with silence. A silence not of absence, but of presence. Not of forgetting, but of memory. The abyss is the final witness. And what it holds for eternity. Because the abyss never forgets.